What we need are constitutional restraints on the power of government to interfere with free markets in foreign exchange, in foreign trade, in many other aspects of our lives.
Why would you want to return to a concept that this country had in 1900? Why would you want to return to where a few control the economic destiny of every working man and woman?
It's exactly the other way, Mr. Deason. The best way to limit the control of a few is free trade on a worldwide basis. There is no measure whatsoever that would do more to prevent private monopoly development than complete free trade. It would be far more effective than all the antitrust suits in the world.
I totally disagree. You would wind up with a situation like in the movie Rollerball, where corporations carved out their spheres of economic influence throughout the world and controlled everything. It would be controlled by corporations in its entirety.
How do you see it performing, Don Rumsfeld? Do you want to see governments, as it were, enforcing competition by chasing down monopoly, restrictive practices, and all the rest in the society?
The record's clear that they don't do it well. They can't manage the...
But does that mean they shouldn't do it at all or do it better?
Take the wage price controls in the United States of America. I happen to have been involved, and I don't say it with any great pride. The real world is, I don't care about good intentions, I don't care about brains, I don't care about integrity. The fact of the matter is they're not smart enough to manage the wages and prices of every American, 215 million strong. They can't do it well, they do it poorly. And the weight of that is harmful. It's graphically shown in every document issued by the Council of Economic Advisors in the United States.
But what about the additional question, though? Does the government properly, in this country or elsewhere, ensure competition by other devices? I'm not talking now about price control, wage control, but ensuring competition rather than permitting price fixing or agreements and monopoly. What do you feel about it?
I feel the government properly acts in that area. The government must be there to ensure competition.
The government's not smart enough. Look at the antitrust law. You talk about the implementation of antitrust regulations in the United States between the Department of Justice and the FTC. It's a patchwork mess. There isn't any logic to it. People don't know what to do. They can't get answers. They're inhibited from mergers and consolidations that would make a lot of sense from the standpoint of the consumer.
I am in favor of the laws which make agreements in restraint of trade illegal. Most of the rest of the antitrust apparatus has promoted monopoly instead of hindered monopoly. If you look at where there are monopolistic elements in the world and in the United States, including the multinationals you want to refer to, in almost every case, that monopoly derives from a special grant by government. And therefore, the problem is not how does government enforce competition? How do you keep government from setting up monopolies? That's the real problem if you look at the real world and not at the preamble or the language of antitrust measures and similar laws.
How close are you to what Deason was saying a moment ago, though, in this area? He seemed to be arguing with you that there was a responsibility to make competition work.
The responsibility is to set up a framework of laws and of arrangements under which competition will flourish. And the most...
Inevitably flourish?
Well, so far as I know, I don't know of any case in history in which monopolies have been able to maintain themselves for very long without having government assistance directly come in on their side. The trade union monopolies that Mr. Deason represents would never have the kind of power they do now if it weren't for the special privileges which government has granted to them. I can perfectly well understand his being in favor of such action, of antitrust action by the government, because it really is pro-monopoly action in the main.
Why were those exemptions to monopoly laws given to unions?
Because of the political power of unions, of course. I'm not questioning that.
And because of the tremendous imbalance of power of companies at the time that unions were getting their start.
You talked about the need for constitutional restraints on governments to prevent them interfering in foreign exchange, free markets, and in foreign trade. Now, what have you in mind, Milton, when you say constitutional restraints?
I have no doubt what I have in mind. If I could persuade the public, I would like it to adopt a constitutional amendment strictly parallel to the constitutional prohibition in the text of the Constitution against the central government, against state governments imposing tariffs or imposts. I would like to have a constitutional amendment which would read, The Congress shall not impose any taxes, taxes on imports, or give any subsidies to exports, except such as may be necessary. I think the wording of the Constitution is that the states are permitted to do it if it's necessary for inspection. That's the excuse under which California inspects you every time you drive past to see whether you're carrying any plants or fruits or vegetables.
Milton, let me ask you a question. How long do you think that the United States would survive if the United States enacted what you would like to have?
I think the United States would prosper in a way that is hardly imaginable today. It would be an example and a beacon to the rest of the world. What kind of sense does it make? Here we are supposedly the leaders of the world. We are the ones who promote freedom and free enterprise and individual initiative. And what do? We force puny little Hong Kong to impose limits, restrictions on its exports at tariffs in order to protect our textile workers. We go to Japan and we say to Japan, for God's sakes, you got to limit the number of television sets you come out. Instead of doing that, we ought to be setting an example to the world. And if we set the kind of an example to the world that Great Britain set to the world in the 19th century, it would be a tremendous, have a tremendous impact. It would strengthen our moral position in the world. It would strengthen our ethical position in the world. Instead of giving money to underdeveloped countries to produce products which we then refuse to buy and don't let them export to us, we would be saying to the rest of the world, if you produce anything, if you can produce anything that can have a market here, come, we're delighted to buy it, and we'll produce things for you to buy. That's the kind of a pattern I would like to see the United States establish.
Your members buy that?
Never.
Never is a long word, sir.
Yes, you're
and
right.
you must distinguish
and one
between...
should never say never.
Your union officials would not buy it, but I am not sure your members would
No,
not.
my members would never buy it either. I cannot conceive of the United States setting itself up to become a target for the rest of the world.
It's not a target.
There would be absolutely nothing that would require or compel any other country to enact any reciprocal agreements relative to tariffs.
That's right.
And until such time as they had succeeded in dumping in the United States, and I use dumping in the broadest sense of the word, any and every product, either government subsidized by a foreign government, either put there because of multinational corporations, manufacturing facilities in a foreign country, until they had succeeded in absolutely draining us dry.
Draining us dry of what?
Of every asset.
How? What would they do with the dollars they got?
They'd probably buy up as they are now as the...
If they bought up?
Farmland.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, let's broaden this on this very argument now, constitutional amendment argument. We've learned from our union friend he can't sell it and won't sell it. Would business buy it?
Oh, no. Speaking...
Large section of the argument.
I'm not saying whether I'd buy it. I'm saying whether
no.
business would buy it, which was the question. No, when I speak not as a businessman, but as a ex-government employee, whenever proposals like that came up, one of the first things people see happen is government, business and labor come in lockstep saying, horrors, horrors, the sky's falling. There's a commonality of interest there, and people get used to what is. They get terribly conservative, and they know how to work the system the way it exists, and particularly the big unions and the big business, and they get very satisfied with it. They can manage it pretty well, and anytime you try to unravel any kind of regulation or restriction or government intrusion, they're philosophically for it, but in the practical world, they don't want you to change the drill. They've just figured out how to work this. Why should you then change it and make it all that more complicated? No, I think you'd get a good deal of reaction, just like you did out of the steel company in your television show.
And what would be international reaction, do you think, as an international economist? Supposing Milton got his amendment, constitutional amendment, which had that effect, how would other countries react to it?
Well, I think Milton's fundamental example of why not be like Britain in the 19th century is wrong. Britain in the 19th century was the industrialized country. It was well ahead of everybody else.
Many decades ahead.
Many decades ahead of everybody else. And it was making larger profits, larger economic rents on its production. And it was doing it at very great cost to the workers in Britain. The workers in Britain were greatly exploited under those circumstances, and we don't want to go back to that. The international situation is much more complex. There are countries at different levels of development, countries with different social systems, and countries with different social objectives. So I think that the solution is wrongly founded, and it's millenarian, it's utopian. I think that we have to think of a much more realistic process of discussion, negotiation, such as has taken place through GATT, to get to where we're going without hurting the people who pay for the adjustment, and that is basically the workers, not the economists.
Could I just comment briefly? I worry about the argument that because of the complexities of international relations, that therefore they must be planned and managed. By definition, we're not capable of managing the world economy. Each instance when we try to do it, it doesn't work out quite the way we intended.
I don't apologize for a moment for being millenarian, because I think unless we know where we want to go, the timid steps that we take in that direction will go in the wrong direction. And if we're going to go in the right direction, we ought to have a view. But I want to be sure to get down on the record a very strong objection to the statement of fact by Helen Hughes about 19th century Britain. I believe it is simply wrong. The workers were not exploited. The studies that have been done recently have shown over and over again that the 19th century was a period in which the ordinary English worker experienced a very rapid and very substantial rise in his standard of life. England does not stand alone. Japan had complete free trade for 30 years after the Meiji Restoration. Japan in more recent years has not. Japan in more recent years is not an example I would cite. But in its early years, it had complete free trade. So I don't believe England stands alone. Now, on the
Politics of it.
On the politics of it, of course it's not politically feasible. Why? Because it's only in the general interest and in nobody's special interest. Each of us is fundamentally has more concern with our role as a producer of one product than we have as a consumer of 1,001 products. The benefits of a tariff are visible. Mr. Deason can see that his workers are, quote, protected. The harm which a tariff does is invisible. It's spread widely. There are people who don't have jobs because of the tariff, but they don't know they don't have jobs. There's nobody who can organize them. Consumers all over are paying a little more for this, that, and the other thing. They don't recognize that the reason they're paying for it is because of the tariff. The businessmen, I have never been in favor. I'm not pro-business. I'm pro-free enterprise, which is a very different thing. And the reason I'm pro-free enterprise...
When you say that.
No, I don't mean to point to you, Don. I point to the business community, because you are an exception.
But he conceded there was a tacit alliance across that way to prevent you from achieving your purpose.
Oh, there's no doubt that there's such an alliance. In my opinion, the strongest argument for free enterprise is that it prevents anybody from having too much power, whether that person is a government official, a trade union official, or a business executive. It forces them to put up or shut up. They either have to deliver the goods, produce something that people are willing to pay for or willing to buy, or else they have to go into a different business.
Well, there we must leave the argument for this week.